All right, so we have hit the top of the hour, so we will go ahead and get the webinar started. So hello and welcome to today's webinar, 3 Critical Elements of a Cybersecurity Strategy. My name is Matthew Formasano. I'm a product marketing specialist for the network engineering team at LBMC Technology Solutions. I'll be your host and moderator for the day. So thank everyone for joining. Just a few housekeeping items to go over before we get started. All lines have been muted to eliminate any background noise. If you experience any technical difficulties, please let us know by using the chat panel. We will be taking questions throughout today's webinar and we'll answer as many as we have time for. So feel free to submit your question at any time. You can do this either in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen or by using the chat feature. We do encourage you to use both the chat and the question and answer feature, as there are quite a few attendees registered for today, and you have a captive audience of users from around the country in many different industries. So you never know, you might be facing a challenge that someone else here has already been through or solved. After today's event, you will be receiving an email with the slides from today's presentation, the recording, and a survey link. Please fill out the survey. It's very short and it just helps us improve any future webinars that we do. As we have many new faces here today, I do want to take a few moments to just tell you a little bit about LBMC Technology Solutions. So we like to say that we're your team for everything tech, from help desk and IT support to fully outsourced managed IT solutions. We're the team you can call to tackle any technology project, from something small like Office 365 licensing to a large-scale infrastructure project like moving to the cloud. LBMC Technology Solutions is here to help. So if you think of a need, drop it in the Q&A, the chat, or send us an email at info@lbmctech.com. Another thing to point out, as LBMC has grown and the needs of our clients have expanded, so has our offerings and family of companies. We like to say that we can do everything for your business except clean it. I won't read this entire list, but as you can see, we have many different companies in our family that are experts in their specific fields. So if you ever need assistance with any project, we would love the opportunity to assist you. Now, without further ado, let me welcome our 3 presenters for today's webinar. First off, we have Sandy Hall. She's the president of Bailey Special Risks. Sandy has over 20 years of experience as an insurance broker and has been an owner of Bailey Special Risks since 2009, a certified insurance counselor since 2007. She's a member of the Professional Liability Underwriting Society, Wholesale and Specialty Insurance Association, and USA Alliance of Wholesale Brokers. She began specializing in cyber and management liability back in the early 2000s and has participated in their evolution to what they are today. Our next presenter will be Van Steele, a shareholder with LBMC Risk Services. Van leads LBMC's cybersecurity consulting service line. He has over 20 years of experience in professional services roles. He has served clients across many industries, most notably 3 of the 4 largest financial institutions in the world and a large US healthcare governing body. Van is constantly challenging himself to find better, more effective and efficient ways to help both his clients and colleagues, and his experience with clients large and small, along with his passion for learning and development, have provided him a perspective that he trusts will have a positive and lasting impact for clients. And last but not least, our final presenter is Tim Morton. Tim is a virtual chief information officer with LBMC Technology Solutions. With over 2 decades of industry experience, Tim has honed his skills across a wide spectrum of domains, including security engineering, cyber architecture, virtualization, and cloud security and IT leadership. His background includes more than 10 years of service as a cybersecurity consultant, where he partnered with organizations across various industries, advancing their cybersecurity initiatives. His consulting career offered the opportunity to live and work abroad for a global metals manufacturer in the Middle East region, where he led international efforts in cyber incident response, established new vulnerability and threat management solutions, provided management and oversight of the corporate cybersecurity strategy, and drove efforts to achieve compliance. Welcome, Sandy, Van, and Tim, and thank you for presenting today.
Thank you.
All right, so I want to start off with a question to each one of you, but we're first going to start with Tim. So Tim, kind of what do you do in your role as a VCIO, and why is it important?
Yeah. Thank you, Matthew, for the warm intro, and thank you for hosting this panel discussion. I think it's a great idea that we come together routinely as a community and talk about cybersecurity and strategies and how those relate to cyber insurance. You know, it's a topic that comes up frequently during conversations with our customers. And in my role as a VCIO here at LBMC, I partner with our clients and try to advance their overall IT security and IT strategy and help companies navigate those challenges that come along with that. So in that role, I'm constantly engaging with customers about their technology and cybersecurity goals. And we're finding more and more conversations are shifting towards specifics around cyber insurance in particular.
Perfect. So Van, I want to come to you next. What does risk services do for organizations, and what does it help them to decide to do?
Sure. So as a shareholder in our risk services team are very broad, and we do a lot of compliance related assessments, whether it's a SOC report or high trust or PCI assessments, things like that. We also do penetration testing for our clients. It's a good hygiene type practice that clients need to do, but it's also sometimes required by regulators and customers and things like that. I would tell any client where Tim stands in as the virtual CIO, we have people that stand in as their virtual CISO, chief security officers. And whenever we do that, we always advise clients the first thing you need to do is a risk assessment. So my team spends a lot of time doing risk assessments, aligning that to a national framework like a standard like NIST or a CIS, and then conducting those assessments for our clients. The goal being, where do clients need to deploy their resources, right? Security tools, people, dollars. What is where are the biggest gaps? Where are the areas of concern based on reasonably anticipated threats? So that's what we do.
Excellent. And then finally, Sandy, kind of what does Bailey Special Risks do? And then what is cybersecurity insurance and why is it needed?
We're a wholesale broker. We work with independent insurance agents to help their insured clients find the broadest coverage available. When it comes to cyber policy, a monoline cyber policy that will address their concerns and provide them the limits that they need to address the financial losses associated with those. We've been writing cyber insurance since the early 2000s. It became a significant focus around the 2010s and has grown exponentially since then. As the demand and the cyber crime has increased, our book of business has also increased. We write monoline policies that address both the liability associated with a breach. So if you have to do notifications, if you have to contact the Attorney General's offices, if you have to put out press releases, the insurance helps you with all of that. It helps cover the financial loss associated with that, as well as business income losses associated with it. As big of an asset from a monoline policy is the connection to the resources that come with that. So the experienced legal teams that deal with cybercrime every day, they know who the cyber criminals are. They know how these things evolve, so they know how to guide their insureds on how to respond when there is a breach. Computer forensics to go in and investigate what happened, what's involved, how you're going to have to recover from that. They also preserve evidence as part of the criminal process so that you can help the FBI maybe find those criminals, but also preserve the evidence to protect your business. And then they help the business get back up and running as efficiently and as cost effective as possible without destroying them. So it's a very good tool. There are risk management tools that come with policies as well. So from the beginning to an actual breach, there's a lot of assets, a lot of positives that come with the insurance policy.
Perfect. Thank you. So Sandy, just kind of going to come back to you for our next question. So one thing that COVID really kind of affected is remote work or a hybrid work system. With that now being so heavily utilized, how does that change the need for cybersecurity insurance?
So the pandemic shift to remote work increased cyber incidents over 200% in those first 2 years. There was just an explosion of incidents as a result of remote work. It opened up access points that weren't otherwise available. Also because of the how swiftly it all had to be rolled out to so many to scale, it put huge demands on IT professionals to meet all of those demands, who were also working under pandemic restrictions as well. So it just gave cyber criminals more access points, and it drove up incidents. Additionally, there's been some studies that people working from home are less stringent regarding cybersecurity. They're more likely to fall for really good phishing scams. So we kind of let people's guards down, which also gave them another access point into the system. This kind of woke the insurance carriers up to how much exposure they had on their books. And as a result of that, they started to look at their books and they're like, this is not financially viable once we start really scaling out. It's estimated that only 25% of small businesses currently have like MFA. So if you have a large book of small business on your book and they're susceptible to these breaches, that becomes financially unviable. So they started looking for a way to rectify their books so that they could continue to provide this needed coverage and it could still not be a loss leader. So they started looking at the cyber security aspect of that, patch management, training of employees, and then multi-factor authentication became a big one. Multi-factor authentication really does stand between a lot of those brute force attacks where they're just robo attacking for passwords. So if they've found that if there's MFA in place for both email access, remote access, and privileged user access, that they can significantly reduce the number of claims. So therefore, they began to require that as part of becoming an insured with their organization. So they became a little more security focused as a result of this remote work.
Perfect. Tim, our next question is coming to you. Kind of going back to that remote work and the rise of it and the increased use of personal devices. What are some of the most critical security challenges that businesses face in safeguarding their data and networks? And playing off of that, how can organizations strike the right balance between robust cybersecurity measures, but also ensuring a seamless user experience for their customers and employees?
Yeah, that's a great question, Matthew. And it's true, the rise of remote workers and the increase in personal devices brought about a lot of significant challenges in the cybersecurity space on how we safeguard corporate data that's on those devices. So there's a lot of key challenges that we're facing as a result. And one of those is endpoint security of those personal devices. How do we secure a device not owned by corporate? How do we patch it? Lots of other questions around those devices. Very similar, how do we protect against data leakage and loss from an unsecured or unknown device? So that's a challenge as well that we're facing. How do we facilitate remote access and authentication for those remote workers? That's something that's always an issue and a concern. And that sort of leads into network security and the challenge there, where we have remote workers that aren't necessarily sitting in the office anymore within the corporate network boundaries, and some of the corporate network securities may not apply to those remote workers anymore. So that's a challenge as well. There's also issues with compliance and regulation when it comes to remote workers that we have to look at too. So all these challenges add up that make it difficult to really keep track of what's going on with the remote force. From a cyber operational perspective, we're seeing in the field a lot higher levels of business email compromises, especially in Microsoft 365 environments. And those are usually a result of a phishing attack on a remote worker in a lot of cases. We're also seeing a lot more ransomware events and a lot higher costs to recover from those events. Those costs vary depending on the source, but some sources like Sophos state that it's usually about $1.82 million to recover from a ransomware event. So that means if your company suffers a ransomware attack, on average, you're going to be incurring costs in the millions. Costs from lost production, costs from recovering and rebuilding, legal and forensics costs, and of course, reputation and brand damage. So it's a big liability for a lot of companies out there. And another factor we're seeing is really an increasing complexity in the cyber insurance application process itself, and overall really tougher requirements for getting a cyber policy. So it seems like insurance providers are starting to be a lot less lenient when they're writing policies than they were, say, 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. So I guess the high level takeaway on this, companies are starting to recognize the risk and the cost of cyber attacks, and that those are rising. And they're also using cyber insurance policies more and more as a key component of their overall cyber strategy to kind of offset that liability. So a lot of our customers are finding it difficult navigating this process, and us as VCIOs come in and help facilitate those efforts on behalf of our customers. So that's kind of what we're doing to help with the remote worker aspect, but it is a challenge for sure. It's a great question.
Excellent. And then Van, kind of staying on remote work here, and kind of taking into account the points that Sandy and Tim mentioned, how has the remote work changed or affected what you typically see in risk assessments and weak points that have arisen due to that?
Sure, absolutely. And I think Sandy and Tim brought up great points. Another thing to look at, though, is let's talk about the people themselves, right? And cybersecurity professionals who used to work in the office and now have gone home. Looking back on it, that's a couple years ago now, right? And cybersecurity is a high turnover kind of business, right? And there's a lot of opportunities and jobs out there for those individuals. So what happens is, the people who went home at the beginning of the pandemic, they no longer work there. They've since moved on to 1 or 2 or 3 other jobs. So now you have people who started remote, never experienced being in the office. And unless you had, rock solid policies and procedures that they could follow, or if they spent, 6 weeks shadowing the person they're taking over for, there's a high likelihood that they don't know what they're supposed to do day in and day out. They don't have a full grasp on all the tasks that they're responsible for. And that's what we've been seeing, right? Is policies maybe well written, but the people are not familiar with it because they don't have that day-to-day interaction in the office. There's kind of, there's no replacement for yelling over your cubicle wall, right? Which happens out here in the office, right? That doesn't happen now that these are remote workers. And there's a high likelihood these people don't know what their responsibilities are with respect to cybersecurity, whether they're an IT professional, whether they're specifically a cybersecurity professional. We see a lot of knowledge gaps there. There's a lot of tribal knowledge in cybersecurity. And unfortunately, we lost a lot of it when we sent people home, and then we've since turned those jobs over.
Excellent. Thank you. I do want to take a quick.
Catch up in there, Matthew, if you don't mind. I think you make a great point, Van, about the whole culture and user training and awareness piece of this puzzle, right? I think it speaks a lot to a company that has solid training in place that helps prevent some of that institutional knowledge loss that Van talks about. So that's also a big part of our strategy, user training and awareness. And I think an educated workforce is a more secure workforce, in my opinion.
So that's actually a good point, because we actually do have a couple questions posted in the Q&A, and one of those kind of does relate to training and awareness, and they're asking, what role does employee training and awareness play in the effectiveness of cybersecurity insurance coverage? That may be something for kind of Tim and Sandy to speak on.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, from my perspective, working with cyber insurance applications and going through that process, they usually ask about user training and what the program looks like, and if you're doing it routinely, annually or quarterly or whatever that looks like. And if you have policies in place that say things like you're doing new user onboarding security training, and also, again, the routine quarterly training or annual training, whatever that looks like in your policy. So I do see that quite a bit, that the cyber insurance providers are asking about that specifically.
They want to make sure that there is a program in place, that it's regularly implemented, that all employees have to participate, including executives. Sometimes they try to get out of it. Sometimes we're the weak link in the organization. So they do want to see company-wide, entity-wide distribution of that training on a regular basis. They prefer monthly. They prefer that it be something more interactive than just watch this 5-minute video. So are you doing phishing scam testing? So do you have a program that sends out those phishing scams? And if you have employees that fall for it and click contaminating links or download documents, do they have to go through the remedial training and those kind of things? So the more robust the training programs are, the better. Humans just, we're busy. We have a lot of emails. We're trying to get through as much of it as we can. Those of us that are still working, who didn't get to retire with the mass exodus, there's a lot of pressure on us all, and there's a lot to do in a day. So the more that is top of mind, the more likely you are to not fall for that. We regularly in the office, hey, we got this weird looking email, and can someone call the agent? Most of the time, it's an agent who just sent out something that they weren't thinking about. They didn't notice that the subject line was something not business related. But having that as a high priority and talking about it regularly definitely impacts your susceptibility to cyber criminals.
Yeah, it's also important to have effective training, not just too much training or an overwhelming amount of training. It needs to be the right amount. There should be a balance there. I think good security should enable users to work securely, but it shouldn't impact their workflows and it shouldn't hamper their productivity. So there's a balancing act there that's needed, and that's something that we as VCIOs help customers navigate all the time. So I'm glad you brought that up, Sandy.
Perfect. And the next question I want to pose to each one of you, we'll start with Sandy, then move to Tim, and then Van. So artificial intelligence and machine learning are terms that we hear all the time across any industry today. They're being utilized both by cybersecurity professionals as well as malicious actors. How can artificial intelligence and machine learning be utilized in each of your industries to help build that robust cybersecurity strategy?
Insurance is not typically the first taker of new technology, so it will lag a little behind the cyber criminals for sure. But one of the tools that they're currently using is a scan of outward-facing networks for applicants for insurance. So a lot of the carriers will go out and scan those. Do you have open ports? Are there known vulnerabilities that they can access? And they can generate that report. They can use that report for underwriting. So we do occasionally get scans back, results back that are there's so many areas of concern. The carriers like, we can't insure them until they address these concerns. They need to get with their IT professional and close up these holes. That is the minority of things. Usually what we get back is a scan that says, hey, they have 2 open desktop ports. Can they close those up? If they close those up, we're good to move forward. If there's a lot of concerns, it could affect pricing and it could restrict coverage. So if they don't have any MFA, a carrier might say, there are some nationally known carriers that say, we will not insure you if you don't have MFA implemented. There are others that say, yes, we'll offer you insurance for the liability portion, but we're going to restrict the business income losses. So, if you have a ransomware attack, we're going to help you pay that ransomware, but there's not going to be any money left over for all of the business income losses associated with your downtime with that. So they're using the technology to kind of assess the risk right now. I'm sure it will evolve through time and they'll get better at using those as risk management tools. I think that is where that will evolve in the insurance industry.
Tim, what about your industry with machine learning and AI?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think AI and ML have become powerful tools both for defenders and attackers, red and blue teams in cybersecurity in general. In cyber defense or the blue team space, we're seeing a lot of new products coming out that have AI and ML features at the core. And we're also seeing already established products like endpoint detection and MDR solutions that are layering in new AI and ML into their existing products as feature enhancements. So it's definitely a lot of activity there in the cyber defense space with AI. But also we're seeing a lot of activity around offensive security as well, where attackers and malicious actors are using AI to help craft their attacks. So, for example, a phishing email, they often use AI to help create more, more convincing phishing emails and social engineering scams in general. So there's that piece, but I've also heard of people using AI to help actually write malicious malware code and develop new viruses. That's a little bit scary of a thing too. Overall, I expect AI is going to continue to be used more and more by the bad guys. So I think that's something we're going to see continue to increase.
And then Van, what about your industry? Again, kind of, any utilization of AI and ML?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's obviously become more prevalent since ChatGPT and OpenAI have been out there since last November, and now, new iterations 3.5 and 4.0 now. It's become more of a common, discussion item. But let's not kid ourselves. AI has been around for a very long time. Machine learning has been around for a very long time, particularly in security tools, right? So IDS or next gen firewalls have AI and machine learning. They are looking through mountains of data that a human being cannot do, and they're identifying behaviors using AI, using machine learning. So it's been around for a while. That part of it, not too much of a game changer, but if you don't have next gen firewalls, you should, right? Because as Tim said, the threat actors, the bad guys, are using AI as well. So the only way to fight AI is to use AI, right? Because humans can't necessarily fight it. So that's there. On the other side, the ChatGPT, that kind of stuff, I am cautioning our clients, say, listen, find ways to use it. Find ways to eliminate repetitive tasks or leverage the tool for that, but be aware of what you are putting into an open source as far as data goes, right? Your data is your data. Don't put it out there. Then it becomes part of the library and it can get called upon by someone else who puts in a query into OpenAI. There are ways to bring that AI model in-house and only use it on your data. And I encourage our clients to do that. But look, it's just valuable. I mean, for example, I had a client that needed to post a requisition for a new database administrator. So they need to put together a job opening, right? Well, job description, type into ChatGPT, write me a job description for a database administrator. And it did it. And you get it back. It's not perfect. You're going to have to tweak it. But you probably just saved yourself an hour and a half, 2 hours. So I encourage all of our clients to start using it, but just be aware of what you're putting into that model.
Excellent. Thank you. Sandy, I want to come to you next. So cybersecurity insurance, that term seems to have really been brought front and center with awareness in the past 5 years or so. Can you explain a bit about what drove it to become as prevalent as it is now and kind of how it's changed from inception to today?
In the early 2000s, it was more focused on data, loss of data, and the liability associated with that data. But as the cyber criminals realized that they could use ransomware attacks and get quick cash that doesn't involve selling of that data. They can just ransom the business and get an influx of income. They shifted their tactics away from just absorbing data to ransom a business and exfiltrating data as part of that now, which shifted the focus of insurance policies. So originally they were very liability driven. It was, you have had this breach, you've lost this data, you now have obligations associated with that, the notification, credit monitoring that you're offering to all those people who have been affected. You have to put out press releases, you have to notify the attorneys general. All of the coverage was associated with the liability. But as the tactics of the criminals changed, the focus of the policy had to expand. Insureds themselves and businesses, that changed. They're like, yes, we have those liabilities, but we also have other concerns. How do we get cryptocurrency? How do we make a payment to cyber criminals if that's your only option? How do we recover from our backups? How do we cover those business losses that we've had? We have to replace servers now as a result of this. Is there any coverage for replacement of hardware? Did we accidentally transfer funds to who we thought was a legitimate party, but turns out to be a cyber criminal? So do we have a social engineering law that we now have to pay? So the policies evolve to address those concerns, and it continues to evolve. Every year, the policies change from the year before. Every carrier tweaks theirs a little bit, adds the new coverage, and then those in the industry have to follow to keep up. So it's a constantly changing dynamic insurance policy. It makes it interesting on a daily basis. And it's not just driven internally by the insurance carriers, it's driven by the demands of the customers and the cyber criminal activity. So it does change throughout time.
Excellent.
I guess all that is the other.
Tim, I want to come to you next. So cyber threats are constantly evolving, and social engineering has become one of the most pervasive ways to target an organization's employees. For those unfamiliar, could you explain kind of what social engineering is, and then outline some ways that organizations can be proactive and educate their workforce to recognize and respond to those threats effectively?
Yeah, certainly. I'm glad you asked. This sort of plays off, I think, what Van said earlier about institutional knowledge and being remote and that topic. So social engineering itself is a form of cyber attack where an attacker is trying to manipulate individuals into either giving up confidential information like a password or username, or into providing access into a system that they shouldn't have access to. So the attacker's goal is to deceive and manipulate, and rather than directly exploit, a system level vulnerability. So it's really an attack on the human, not necessarily an attack on a computer. So it really relies on human interaction and exploiting trust between the end user and the attacker. So the most common forms of social engineering attacks that we see would be phishing attacks, the fraudulent emails that appear to be legitimate, again, with the goal of trying to gather some sensitive information from the user, gain access to the system. So those are the most common attacks. There are several others, but I think the ones we focus on most in our industry would be phishing and spear phishing. To help combat against social engineering, user awareness training is usually the best way to help prevent against that. Building cyber awareness helps staff recognize and respond to any phishing or other social engineering type attacks, and it also can really help reduce your overall risk to the organization, having that level of knowledge internally on how to look for phishing attacks and how to respond to those when they do occur.
Excellent. So Van, kind of as we just addressed cyber threats and how they're constantly evolving, how can businesses ensure that their security program stays current to address the new and emerging threats?
Yeah, so every organization should adopt a framework, right? There's plenty out there. NIST, CSF, as I mentioned, there's high trust if you're in the healthcare space. There's CIS controls. There's a number of frameworks out there, ISO. Use those frameworks. Use the informative references behind and underneath those frameworks, and say, gosh, these are things recommended by a governing body that organizations do. Some are not going to be right for you, right? I mean, this is stood up, we're not in national defense. We're not, critical infrastructure maybe, right? So we shouldn't need to do all of these things, but reference those frameworks anytime you're about to conduct a risk assessment or a maturity assessment, right? Use a standard framework. The fundamentals of securing your environment have not changed. Sure, maybe the threat actors are using different tools and techniques, but they're still coming in the same way, right? And so the fundamentals are control your access, right? Educate your workforce, patch your vulnerabilities, and then exercise response. Those are the 4 kind of key fundamental things that organizations should do, and that doesn't change. So, I mean, again, every year when you meet and you do a risk-based assessment on your environment, you should consider what are our risks, what are our crown jewels in terms of our data and our environment, and how to, are they more at risk now than they were last year, and then refresh that. I'd encourage everybody on the line, every organization to do a risk assessment at least annually, and keep in mind those frameworks and those informative references.
Perfect. I want to take another question that came in through the chat here. So someone is asking, can you speak to the role of financial institutions to protect our money from cyber breaches? And what is our rights as a client of banks?
Who do you want to take that, Matthew?
That would most likely be either Sandy or Tim, I believe.
It's not an area that I spend any time on. So they do have obligations, but as to what the specific obligations that banks have to abide by, that is not an area that I spend any time on. Mine is more on the insurance after the fact kind of thing, not the compliance issues.
Tim, would you
Honestly,
have any?
They have the requirements.
Yeah, similar to Sandy, it's not an area of expertise for me, but I think just having a solid strategy really is going to help, help that out tremendously, in my opinion. Knowing what you want to protect against and looking at the risk assessment that Van talked about, having an idea of what your risks are and being able to put budget towards those risks, I think is wise. But ways to protect, I'm not sure about that. I have to do some research on it.
I'm happy to talk. I mean, look, banking is, aside from healthcare, the most heavily regulated environment. I guess you could say, again, national defense and things like that, but banking has loads of rules and assessments that are done against them all the time, right? So they go through these audits from the Federal Reserve and other organizations on, that include their controls around their cybersecurity controls. Absolutely include their cybersecurity controls. From an insurance standpoint, I'm sure that they carry ample cybersecurity insurance, but they also, the Federal Reserve, insures our money up to a certain limit as well. So hopefully whoever asked the question, hopefully maybe you have more money in the bank than is covered by that Federal Reserve. And good for you, by the way, if you do. But you can trust that there are a lot of controls. Now, they might not publicly issue these kind of reports and things like that. If you were an institutional customer of that bank, you would have a right to observe or collect some assurance reports, whether it's a SOC report or a Fed report or something like that they should be able to provide to you. Individual consumers might not have that ability to just ask your local bank to give them your risk assessment. But as an institutional customer of theirs, it's very likely they would easily hand that over and show you what they're doing.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question for Sandy, kind of again going to the question and answer. Will a company's cyber insurance premium rise after they make a claim?
That is not what we usually experience. Typically, the carriers help them work through the issue. As a result of that, they work with their IT professionals to close up those gaps that resulted in that. So if they address those concerns, typically we don't see increases, maybe a minimal one. Usually the only time we run into issues is if they just refuse to make the changes that are required. But in general, after an incident of that type, businesses are like, let's fix this, let's move forward. And we don't typically see a pullback from carriers for either limits or a significant penalty on premium. In fact, they encourage early reporting of incidents. You can reach out to the breach response teams, even if you just have an inkling that something is going on and it doesn't impact the renewal of the policy, the premiums. They can get you in touch with those experts, the forensics experts, the legal experts that can say, you know, this really isn't a breach and isn't something you have to report or take action on, or absolutely you need to take these steps. So they actually encourage reaching out early as a way of minimizing any kind of impact from a negative attack or incident.
Again, we've got another question that kind of hits all three areas. So someone says that they're in a small business and so they do not think that they're a target for hackers. So why would someone in a small business need a vulnerability assessment, any of these extensive tools or insurance? Let's start with you, Van.
This will be an unpopular answer among the panel, but I would say you don't. I mean, all right, well, I could say you don't, right? Think about it this way, you know, if I have a not so great vehicle, not worth a lot of value, do I bother locking it, right? And somebody could take it. Well, yeah, but what's the likelihood they're going to take it? It's really not a very nice car, right? So that's a risk assessment. You've just in your head done a risk assessment, right? And you decided it's not, you know, I don't need to lock this vehicle. If you're a small business and you feel like you're not a threat, you're not a target of threat actors, that might be true. There's a couple of factors. Are you in a regulated environment? Do you have to do these things whether you want to or not? That's one thing. So if you're in healthcare or banking, like we were talking about, you're going to have to. You don't have a choice. So do it. The second thing is some of these are really, really low cost solutions you can put in place that will just help you sleep at night a little bit better, right? So threat actors are looking for soft targets, right? Easy targets, and they're doing it by spraying attacks, right? If you have multi-factor authentication enabled, you're not as easy to hack. You still can be hacked, but you're not as easy. And the likelihood is that the threat actor is just going to walk away. It's like when you were younger and your parents told you to use the buddy system, right? You're less likely to get kidnapped if there's two of you, right? Or multiples of you. It's the same thing in business. If you just look like you have a little bit more security, there's a high likelihood that that threat actor is just going to walk away from that and find someone else that's easier to get.
Tim, what about with what you see in small businesses and cyber defense?
Yeah, I would agree with Van. I think he's right. You know, it's about layering defense and having those different technologies in place to help prevent attacks and make it harder for people to get in. So I think that's a good point. Also, from the data that I've seen regarding ransomware, most attacks are happening on companies between, I think, 50 and 100 million in revenue yearly. And there's also different industries that are under attack more often than others. I know manufacturing's up there at the top, health and finance is up there as well. So you have to factor in those considerations as well. But I do agree with everything Van said.
And Sandy, what about you? Do you see typically smaller businesses getting insurance, or is it you typically kind of those higher level clients?
We insure businesses that make as little as $100,000 a year to those that make billions of dollars a year. Obviously, price is driven based on the size of the risk and how much data you have. So it is pretty low cost for small businesses. Statistically, 60% of uninsured small businesses go out of business within 6 months of having an attack of their network. So while the chances of you being the target of that, you could just be the unlucky person that it happens to. If you have loans to operate your business, are you going to be able to pay those loans back if you can't recover from your breach? If you're ransomed and your system is locked up for 30 days, how much money are you going to lose in that 30 days that you can't meet your financial obligations? So it is a risk assessment. I sleep better knowing that I have insurance and that I work with LBMC to cover my network security concerns. As a small business owner, we're 10 employees. We are not a major corporation, but I have to go to bed at night and sleep. And this is one of the things that gives me that comfort, that I know that I have immediate access to the resources I need, the legal team, the forensics team, to get me back up and operational so I can meet my clients' needs. They're depending on me. And we've had incidents with real estate companies, small real estate agencies that have literally called us and said, we are locked out of our system and you are the only one we know. What do we do? Having access to those resources immediately, and people who aren't in a panic state, they deal with it every day. They know what the next steps need to be. As a small business owner, gives me a lot of comfort. So those are decisions that as business owners, we all have to make on a daily basis. Personally, I wouldn't sleep without it.
Thank you. Another question from the panel here. This one is probably for you, Sandy. They're asking about what policies will need to be in place in order for a cybersecurity insurance policy to be established.
They're looking for patch management. Are you patching those vulnerabilities on a regular basis? Do you have a systemic process for that? It's not just willy-nilly. Do you have backups that are encrypted and segregated from your network? So could you recover if your system is ransomed and locked up? Do you have any other options besides paying that ransom attack? Could you recover from those backups? Do you have a system of software that pre-screens for malicious links and documents? And then do you have MFA in place? So they're going to ask those questions for both remote network access. Can they just get into your system with just a password and a username? For email, remote email access, and for privileged users. So we a lot of times see it for the two and not the privileged users, which is odd because if you're a privileged user, you basically can make any changes to the system. So you want to make sure those privileged users also. So those are the things they're going to ask. They're moving towards asking more questions about active monitoring because it really does cut down on the severity of claims. So if you can isolate it to a few endpoints rather than it infecting the whole network, it significantly reduces the cost associated with that and the damage that's associated. So they are moving in the direction of asking those questions.
Perfect. Another question from our panel here. This will most likely deal with Tim and Van's industries, but they're asking how often do they need to evaluate their security tools? And then what are the most critical items for protection? And how do they know if they are providing the best protection? Let's go ahead and start with Tim first.
Yeah, I think that comes down to what Van said about a risk assessment and having ongoing audits of your policies and your systems and doing routine checks, whether that's annually or quarterly or whatever your compliance regulations state. It's just important to have a sort of routine or a program around that. So important areas to check would be access control, patching systems, user education, obviously, we talked about that. strong password policies, network security. A lot of different areas make up those components, but I do think the most important would be just making sure you have a program that addresses all those. That's my opinion.
Van, what
Yeah.
about you in terms of kind of risk assessments?
Sure. Well, yeah. So, not, during a risk assessment, you should be evaluating, obviously these security tools and whether they have up to date, information, right? Like I said before about next gen firewalls and things like that. Those are collecting the best and the brightest in terms of vulnerabilities. They're getting it on a daily, they're getting it on a minute real time basis, all of these identified vulnerabilities, and then they're scanning your environment to see if those exist in your environment. So making sure that those tools are plugged in. I will take it a step further. It's not just security tools, but it's other tools and applications. An application rationalization exercise in an organization is really worthwhile. So take, for example, file transfer tools. There's dozens of really good tools out there that are secure, right? Pick one, use one, right? If you are using 6 of them, then your exposure is multiplied by 6. Just pick one. And there's a chance you pick the wrong one. That stinks, right? But don't use 6 of them, use one. Then you can do through this rationalization exercise, you could save the organization money, right? By saying, we don't need to have 6 different things. We can use just one. And then you can focus your attention, audit logging and monitoring, collecting logs and things like that on that application alone, instead of 6 applications. You will decrease your exposure. So I think that is a worthwhile exercise that every organization goes through, and you're likely to get leadership, executive sponsorship, and support, because the outcome is probably that you're going to save money in addition to reducing risk.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Our next question from the audience will likely go to Sandy. Have you seen a scenario where a company successfully recovers from a ransomware attack without pain, but still suffers financially due to the reputation of being hit? And is that a real concern?
Yes, we do have insureds that recover without paying the ransom. They're able to come back from their backups, get back to operations without actually paying the ransom. There has been a shift in the cyber criminals activity because of that, because businesses became much better secured and were able to recover from their backup, where they began, in addition to the ransomware attack, exfiltrating data. So they can still then go out and use that against them. But typically, if you can avoid paying the ransom, you can get back up. You are going to have downtime. The typical downtime is about 22 days if you experience a ransomware attack. So you're going to have those business income losses, even if you are able to avoid paying that ransom. Additionally, you could have some reputational losses associated with that. Those are the lagging coverages that get triggered. The first coverages are going to be, the legal, the forensics, all of that. And then the business income losses. Reputational loss, you would actually have to prove that because of this incident, you lost business. But in the event of that, the policies do pay for that. But absolutely, we see people able to recover without paying the ransom.
Excellent. Our next question will likely include Van and Sandy. Sandy, I'll start with you first. How do organizations accurately assess their cyber risk and then use that to determine the appropriate level of cybersecurity insurance that they need?
Part of it is they have to assess how much data that they require, that they request from their customers. So do they have a lot of personal identifiable information? Social security numbers, driver's license. That would be something that would drive greater insurance needs. Do they have personal health information? Cyber criminals get a lot of money from selling health records. So do they have a lot of that? That would drive a greater demand for that. Do they have business income concerns if they experience a significant downtime? So manufacturers often want higher limits because if they're down for 20 days, 30 days, they're going to be out a lot of business income. So they tend to focus more on the business income loss of that. But you have to assess all of that and determine how much of it you're willing to absorb and how much of it you need to cover somewhere else. And that's when you turn to an insurance product for that. We typically don't sell less than $1 million, even to small businesses. If someone really pushed for less than that, we would want to know that they understand that if there is a significant ransom attack, it's probably going to exceed $500,000 in coverage. So we typically don't sell less than $1 million, but we have healthcare risks and manufacturer risks that buy significantly more. So you have to determine that for yourself and your business.
And Van, what about you? Can you speak kind of on the risk side of that?
Yeah, so first of all, if you're a business to business kind of organization, it's likely that your business partners are dictating your insurance coverage limits, right? They're probably going to say, we're not going to do business with you unless you carry insurance of X, right? So there's that. There's also, depending on how you're financing your business, there might be debt covenants and requirements from a loan that say that you need to do these minimum things and have this in minimum coverage, right? They're covering their potential losses as well. Sandy had shared, going down or being offline for 22 some odd days. Do some math. What's that going to cost you, right? And can you afford to go a month without revenue? What would that be for your business, right? Use Google, right? Just say, what's the average cost of a cybersecurity incident? And you're going to find it's in the $3 to $4 million range, probably. And you'd say, well, that's for average, and we're bigger than average, or we're smaller than average, right? Use that as a basis, but come up with something that you think is appropriate there. Don't necessarily just rely on the maturity of your environment, because best laid plans, right? Things will happen. Even with great security, something could happen. So I would really, like Sandy said, focus it on the value of the data that you have and the value of the potential revenue that's lost in the event of an incident.
Excellent. Thank you. So I realize we're getting close to the end of the webinar. So I do just want to throw up a poll question to see if anyone is interested in more information, because there's a lot of content all about cybersecurity defenses, cybersecurity insurance, and then risk assessments and penetration tests. So again, just wanted to see if anyone does want information on that. We definitely want to get more information to you. And then I also want to give a huge thank you to Sandy, Van, and Tim for taking the time to present with us today. We did cover a lot of content. If you do have any questions that you think of after today or that you wanted to ask, but we just didn't get to, please reach out to us through our website, or you can send us an email at info@lbmctech.com. We will be sending out an email in a couple days with links to the recording and that survey as well. Again, please fill that out so we can improve our webinars in the future. And again, thanks to everyone for attending today's webinar, and we hope you have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.